So there's this thing called Google App Engine, which they put out maybe 3 weeks ago now. That's it's an application container, and right now it's only hosting Python apps. You upload your app to it, and it handles all the rest. And as long as you write your app relatively sanely, it should scale and be fast enough, and never and not look different to users if there's 10 million of them or 10 of them. That's the theory behind App Engine. But yeah, it's just going to scale because Google's going to do it for you, and their pixie dust is called Bigtable. It's a database that has a few constraints on it, different from what people who are used to SQL are usually comfortable with. You can't do joins, and the other thing about their data store is that you get to cluster the data based on whatever attributes you choose. So you could decide to stick all the data underneath the root node of a user or something, or if not a user, maybe a site, whatever the core of your application is. The idea being that if you're willing to have a little bit more trouble writing your code and maybe not quite have the flexibility of SQL, the data store can scale. And the other part of the theory is that it'd be fast, like the Google apps are, pretty decently fast for what they are. So then we come to the practice, and you get, right now it's beta. In the future, you should be able to pay for, not having a quota, or the quota is your bank account or whatever. But right now they're throwing over quota limits, even if you get a spike of traffic, inside of a minute or whatever, that puts you over a rolling threshold. So it's not even like you can get all the way up to the resource limits they say they're going to have. Yeah, what I was saying earlier is that the Bigtable storage is not going to be exactly intuitive to somebody who's used to MySQL. And the other thing is it's not optimized for serial speed. It's not performant in the way that you might be used to Gmail or something being performant. But it's also not supposed to slow down if you have a lot of traffic hitting the site. So yeah, that's the App Engine basics. So the cool thing about it, when it came out, there was a little controversy in the blogosphere. Some people saying, "Oh, this is going to be lock-in. Like everyone's going to upload their apps to here, and you're not going to be able to run them other places." And why would you hitch yourself to Google's train? Because then you just have to, follow their rules. But their SDK was licensed under the Apache 2.0 license. So the Free Software Foundation says it's a free software license, and I'll take their word for it. It's the SDK they released is Python. They're talking about coming out with JavaScript and Ruby and everybody's favorite language as soon as they can. So you download this SDK, you get the source code, you can do whatever you want with it. By default, all it does is do a rough simulation of the Google hosting environment. The data store API is the same, but it's not built to scale. It's just it actually uses Python marshalling to store everything to flat files on your disk. But you can do what you want with it because of the open source license. So I decided to kind of, not so much because I even wanted to use it. I wasn't scratching my own itch in the traditional open source sense, but I just got kind of frustrated with the blogosphere saying, oh my God, this and that and the other thing, and not I didn't want to come back with an argument. Just running code is probably like the best argument you can make. So I spent a weekend and a half writing this Rails app that basically acts as a surrogate container for App Engine applications. So it just runs on an EC2 instance out there, and it's backed by the open source SDK. I didn't do any computer science stuff to it, so it just, it's as scalable as their SDK is. And it was a good learning experience in terms of, getting really solid on how to, use Rails to manage. Rails is acting like sort of an automated sysadmin in this case. When you upload an app, it makes a place for it and sets up all its environment and whatnot. So yeah, the four main things that it does is when you upload your application, it checks to make sure that this isn't like a MP3 file or something, and you can write applications that won't run and upload them, and your stack trace will just go up on the screen for all your users to see. So that's an option too. But then it makes a directory for the application, and it sets up a few config files, and then uses God and Nginx to do the rest. If you haven't seen God, go to god.rubyforge.org right now, because it's the slickest thing that I've found for managing running processes on a server. I've been using Capistrano, which would probably work great with God for certain tasks, but I haven't touched the AppDrop.com server since I deployed it, and everything's just running smooth. I get an email every once in a while when it restarts a process, but aside from that, it was super easy to configure, and I'm going to show you some config files for God in a little bit. I use Nginx because its config files are real simple also, and because it reloads fast, and part of the application has to reload the Nginx conf every time somebody uploads something. So yeah, that's the big picture of what AppDrop does. The application environment is pretty simple. There's a directory for each application that has the same name as its subdomain. And in there is an app directory, and a data directory, and a log directory, and a little file that tells me what port number I thought this was supposed to be associated with in case I lose a database or something horrible. Basically all this stuff just gets targeted by my version of the SDK. When I launch it, I point it at those directories, so the data gets stored there and the logs get stored there. And it's really pretty simple. I'll give you a link at the end, and you can go look at the code for AppDrop 2. App.rb handles pretty much all the, it's an active record model, and it has a after create callback that does everything, basically shells out to put files in the right places. And, it's about the simplest thing that could possibly work. So here's what a God config looks like. God has its sort of main unit of work is called a watch. So God watches a process and can have various conditions. So what this says is that if the watch is activated and the process isn't, check every 10 seconds, make sure the process is running, and if it's not, send me an email and start the thing. So then you just configure the command that it takes to start the process, and a couple, the name, the user, and the group you want the process to run under, and then this is a string that gets generated. This whole configuration file gets generated when each app is uploaded to AppDrop. So the main, stuff that is dynamic is like here's the name of fug this, which was my test application I wrote, and the data store path where it stores those flat files, and where to put the log. So yeah, God's great. You should all be using God.
How does it verify that the process is running? What mechanism is it using?
I don't have to know. That's
okay.
That's the beauty of it. It can do, if your process doesn't daemonize, it'll handle all that for you. Like, I didn't even have to think about it. If these don't daemonize, you can see I'm just taking standard error, pointing to standard out, and writing it to this file for my log. So yeah, God wraps it all and keeps track of PID files and everything. So yeah, anyone else who has questions, feel free to interrupt. So Nginx, if you haven't used it, it's like Apache without all that junk you don't use. This is basically, I have a subdirectory that fills up with these files that just only have this in it. And Nginx can, has in my master Nginx conf, there's include everything in that subdirectory, all those conf files. So all this does is say, listen on port 80 at this server name, write your logs to that file, and forward everything to this port on localhost. So every application gets a port and a subdomain, and Nginx is the glue that puts it together. So when you upload an application, it drops that file in there and sends signal to Nginx to reload its conf file, and then it's just rock solid after that. So yeah, just a little code sample of some glue. If you could read this, you'd be able to see that I'm just shelling out for everything. Dirty secret for AppDrop is that the Rails app's running as root because I didn't want to have to deal with anything. So yeah, that means it can do things like chown-r apps, blah, blah, blah. So create those, reload Nginx. Don't tell God to dynamically load a config file until the thing gets uploaded. So you don't want to keep trying to start an app where there's no uploaded application to start from. But this, instead of typing it, I just really like that on the god.rubyforge.org page, it says dynamically loading config files into an already running God. So I had to quote that directly. But yeah, it's pretty much it's pretty simple. So now let's go on to the Python part of the story. I think we get straight to Python here. I had to modify the SDK because the one they ship doesn't have any auth loop at all. It's just you could type in you click login and it sends you to a special page, which is hosted still inside that same Python app, and say, you know, I want my username to be blah, and check yes or no for admin, because it's just a debug container. When you're actually running on Google's infrastructure, they use their auth sub protocol and redirect you over there and redirect you back to the application, and their Python container probably has some logic that they didn't release the source code for. So my job was to add auth sub to the SDK. Well, yeah, and here's a little auth sub basics. We can look at that real quick. So here's your App Engine application. The user clicks login. It takes you to a page, or it takes you to a page where the user says, yeah, log me in or not, and then that sends you back to the App Engine application with a little token. My one-time use token is blah, and so then the web application on that redirect uses that one-time token to make a background call back to Google or whoever is going to be the auth sub endpoint for, okay, yeah, some user came along with this token, what's their username, are they an admin, that kind of stuff, and that gets sent back. So that's what I basically cloned in the quickest way possible. So yeah, I'm going to zoom in and show a few pieces of the login controller. If you've probably seen enough of a Rails app to know how sort of actions map to controller methods. There's the login and the authorize. These are both methods that the user sees. Login is pretty much your standard. I basically cribbed it from the login plugin that everybody uses. And authorize is just puts up a screen that says, this application on AppDrop wants you to log into it. Is that yes or no? And when you click yes, then it bounces you back to the application. And then auth is the API action that the SDK hits to get the user information. So we're just going to look at that. It's pretty simple. Look up the application from, well, first look up the authorization token that we created earlier in the login phase, and so you know what user it is that the SDK is requesting information for. Then look up the application, which is included in the request URL as a place to redirect back to when all this is done. And if it's all good, then we just render some stuff about the user as JSON, right? So just remember that the auth action spits out JSON, and then when we go see the Python side of it, it'll all make sense. So on the Python side, this is code I had to write because the Google shipped version of it didn't have any of this. What you've got is, if the URL says logout in it, then erase their cookie. Otherwise, if there's no auth token present, then we still need to do the redirect to get the auth token. You can see none of this stuff is very RESTful. That was kind of weird for me to do when I was first diving in here. If these things, it's sort of one method that handles 3 different use cases and lives at 2.5 different URLs. But that's, I don't know, I imagine in the real Google code there's probably something RESTful sitting behind it, and it's like a middleware layer or something. But yeah, so we've got login from auth. That's if you do have the token, what do you do? And so we're going to go look at that method. So login from auth is, it's pretty simple. You just get the token that was passed in. So the context here is the user has been to that page that says, do you want to log into this particular App Engine application? The user says yes, okay. So they get redirected back to an endpoint that's managed by the Python side, by the SDK, but isn't part of the application code. And so that's this. And what it does is it finds that auth token from the URL and just fires off a request to the Rails app, gets that JSON, parses it, and shoves it in a cookie. So pretty simple there. The only other thing I did was crypt some of the Rails set. How Rails has the option to store the session in a cookie. So you just take the cookie and make a hash of it plus a secret, and validate that every time you read the cookie, validate that hashes out the same way. So as long as that secret stays secret, then no one can forge cookies. The secret's not very secret because this is open source and I just kind of left it in there. So you guys are welcome to hack AppDrop.com. Yeah, so these are the links, and probably the best place to go is github.com/jchris, and there's links to all the code that is relevant to this, so you can zoom in and see how it's actually all hooked together, and just look at the diff if you want to see what I did to their SDK. And hopefully you could put up your own appdrop.com somewhere else and change a couple of constants. So that's about it, unless anyone wants to see it in action. I've got kind of looks like this. I'll show you this. I'll show you this thing's simple. So here's the login loop in action. I'm logged out.
Should explain what fug this is.
Oh yeah, fug this is a joke too, like the whole thing. But basically it's an image bookmarkleting application that lets you make snarky comments about images you find online. So yeah, I click login, and that's going to redirect me to the Rails app. And since I'm already logged in, does that work there? Yes. So I'm already logged in. So all I have to do is click authorize. Otherwise, you'd have to put in your password. So that redirects you back, and now I'm logged in over here. So pretty simple. So that's it. Anybody have any questions? Okay, go ahead.
I have just one question about God.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had used Monet in the past, and if so, what
I
you thought of it.
haven't used it. So, God looked. It was between God and Monet when I was doing the project, and God looked just like that much simpler to set up.
Then I have one follow-up question. As I recall, the last time I looked at using God, there was just something that I had to do, like some configuration in Nginx, or like when compiling Nginx, or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
into that?
I didn't notice anything like that.
All right, maybe I'll go back and look at it.
Yeah, God seems to interact like pretty standard POSIX stuff. I don't know. It probably wouldn't work on Windows, but
You've never had your God process fall down?
no, nothing. Oh, the dirty secret. I had this massive hard drive crash like last week, and no one's ever going to log into appdrop.com as root again because I lost the private key. So we're just going to see how long it lasts. But yeah, it's solid.
I switched over from Monet to God, and the thing that totally killed me was that I was using mongrel cluster restart in the Capistrano or Vlad or whatever, and God immediately saw that the app was going down and would restart it faster than mongrel cluster. I sat there for like 10 minutes going, why hasn't it restarted yet? And then I realized they were fighting each other to restart. One would kill it off, and the other one would restart it. It was crazy. So
I haven't run into that problem. The only problem I've run into before, I think, is when Monet will end up restarting it as a different user than like my deploy user. Because the Monet process is being run much quicker.
I had weird problems with Monet that pretty much forced me to go to God, where after I had moved from Capistrano to Vlad, Monet would not restart it at all under any circumstances, and so I basically had to drop it. And anyway, I've been happy ever since. In fact, I told it to stop telling me when it restarts anything because I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
What was your solution to that, to restart?
You tell God to restart all the processes for you instead of, which is what I would have done if I was smart or paying attention. But
Yeah, it's super simple. You can group processes. So if I want to, like if I were to upgrade some part of the SDK infrastructure that is all running under, I could log into the box. I would just tell it, restart all apps, because there's an apps group that all the apps are running in, and the Rails app wouldn't be affected by that, and none of the other things God is monitoring would be.
Maybe it didn't used to have that command to restart. Maybe that was added.
I'm not sure. I just started using it pretty recently.
So every time someone adds an app to AppDrop, Nginx has to read the entire configuration again
Yeah,
for every app.
seems fine.
Cool.
Yeah, so far.
How many applications do you have on there?
Let's see. It's kind of a funny one. People tend to stop, when they're still ahead. So these are all the applications, but the ones with URLs are the ones that have uploaded successfully. So it looks like about 25, maybe 30.
What do you want to do with AppDrop going forward?
Beg Amazon for your private key. Right?
Yeah. I'm gonna see if I can pull any strings and be able to log in, but I don't even know if they can help me there.
Yeah.
So I might take the whole thing down and start over, or maybe. As far as the project goes, the software,
Yeah.
I'd really like to find somebody who's got an interest in, in maintaining it or following up on bug reports, because, I'm starting a startup and don't really have time for that. It was mostly a rhetorical gesture to put it together, and then kind of an experiment, and just to see if I could do it. So.
You get a lot of support requests yet?
There's one guy who thinks that that it's a shame that when the window's too small, the ad goes over the content. But and I'd love to change that. All right. Well, I guess that's it then.
Awesome.
Nice work.